In the math world, there's this concept called the Pareto Distribution. The phrasing is that 20% of the actors control 80% of the yield. And that sounds really silly and mathy, so I'm going to rephrase it. This is also called the 80-20 rule. This means that 20% of whatever you're doing is generating 80% of the results that you're trying to achieve. You're still doing 100%, but it's that 20 that's generating that 80. Let's take a game dev example. If you have 100 developers, 20% of those developers are bringing about 80% of the results of the game that you're building. The Pareto distribution applies to a lot of different things in life, and some people kind of over-apply it to things, but it definitely applies to Blender. And in Blender, that means there are a few techniques, in this case, mostly keyboard shortcuts, that will give us everything we need to create an avatar. My avatar here is not actually that complex. It's pretty cool what you can do with just a little bit of artistic skill once you've got all of the basics down. What I have here in Blender is just a blank scene. Everything's good to go. I don't really have a whole lot of modifications or anything in the situation. This, for the most part, is just going to be vanilla Blender. There will be exceptions to that, and we'll talk about them when they come up. Let's talk about our approach to Blender. Whenever I'm teaching Blender, I do not recommend that people use any of the little sidebar icons here. We want to use keyboard shortcuts as much as we can so that we can keep the mouse moving, we can keep our fingers moving. Not only will this help us in our workflow to create a character, it will make us better Blender users. So we're going to talk about a couple of different specific keyboard shortcuts that are going to be extraordinarily helpful. So we'll start by pressing Tab to get into edit mode. So Tab will let you get in and out of edit mode quickly. If this is your first time in Blender, we have an object mode and an edit mode, and the edit mode will let us change the geometry, and the object mode will let us move things in space. Now we can move things in the edit mode as well. See, we can do that, but our origin point doesn't change. So when we go back out and we try to change position or rotation or scale in the object mode, you can see it's still orbiting around its origin point. And origin points are a big deal when we're doing a character system like this. Once we're editing, we want to be able to manipulate all of this geometry. Well, how do we do that? The first example is G. So if we press G, we can change the location of things in Blender. So you can see I'm moving it around the screen space, and then it's sort of following wherever it thinks it's supposed to be. So when I move around, I can press G to move things over here, move it over here, move over here. But it's way faster to press G than it is to go and grab this little thing and move it around. Now you can do that if you want to, if it's really helpful, and if you're the kind of person who has trouble with keyboard shortcuts. But I'm going to use the G key throughout this because I want to be able to get through this and get us all home for dinner on time. Our next shortcut is the R key. So if I click and shift click to select another vertex, I can press R to rotate. As you can see, that's sort of the basics of this. It's sort of like the G key. It's very basic. That's rotation. And likewise, I can press the S key. So if I press the S key, it is scale. So it will scale those vertices in and out. That's how we'll move vertices. We don't want to just freewheel through all this stuff. There'll be plenty of times where we want to make a very specific movement. So we'll select some of our vertices here, shift click, grab everything. We'll press the G key to move, and then we'll press the X key to move on the X axis. And if ever we want to cancel a move, we can right click and then it will stop. So let's say I meant to move it on the X axis, but actually what I really wanted to do was move it on the Z axis. I could press G again, and Z will move it up and down. Likewise, I can rotate on the Z axis, or I can size on the Y axis. And you start to see how just pressing a couple of different buttons will start to make you move super fast. So a good example of this is pressing E to extrude. And then we have even more geometry. See, so we just like cloned it, and then there's even more of it. So we can do this again, and we can do this to lengthen things, but also you'll notice that we've created more sets of vertices every single time. And we'll get into that in a minute. So similar to the E key, we also have Inset. So Inset is a lot like doing an extrusion, except that it always pushes the face inwards. So like you can see now I can move this up and I'm starting to make like a chimney stack. But I could also have taken my inset, moving it upwards, and then moved it out, and functionally I've just made an extrude as well. There'll be a lot of times you see me use an extrude, but there will also be times where an inset's really helpful. Command B will give us the bevel tool, and that will allow us to create all sorts of bevels on all of our ridges. And you can see this is also similar to using the other commands. It's just doing certain things at the same time. Now, it depends on how much geometry we have selected, because some of these will save us time in specific instances, and sometimes they will not. However, what happens if we wanted to move all of these? So I'm going to select all of the vertices by pressing the A key, and then I'm going to press Command B, and then now you can see I'm bordering everything. Now you can also change all the bevels over here because we have all of the different settings that we can change if we'd like to. So we can add more segments and stuff. This is really helpful for certain kinds of modeling in Blender, and we won't get into that too much while making our 3D character. So let's talk a bit about loops. Loops is another hack that can help us get into this and move through it really quickly. When we press E, we're making a new stack, but we're also creating a set of loops. Let's go back to our vertices here. Now, we could select all of these individually, but that starts to take a long time, and then we have to move the camera. Now, if we alt-click on one of these lines here, we can actually select all of these loops at once. And Blender knows when there are a series of cross-secting edges that run along a consistent shape. The geometry can hide inside of itself. Sometimes we'll do a move and we'll press right-click to cancel it. Well, if we do an extrusion, I'll alt-click on these two edges over here to do this. We'll press E and do another extrusion. We'll press it again, and we'll right-click. Now, the first time, it created a set of loops, but then this time, you'll notice it kind of feels like it did what it was supposed to. However, if I go over here and grab our faces, and I grab it again, you'll see that actually we made the extrude, it just didn't go anywhere. And that's something we gotta watch out for constantly while we're doing this. The next loop solution we have is the loop cut. So if we press Command R, we can bring up the loop cut tool. And basically this will scan throughout all of our models to find places that we can make new loops. It'll always start by putting them right in the center, but if we click it, then it'll move up and down. So I will oftentimes right click to make sure things stay in the center, but you can see we've created the loop. What's cool about the loop cut tool is that sometimes we'll want more loops, so we can rotate our middle mouse and then we can have more. So let's say there's a spot, maybe it's usually arms, where we're gonna need like a bunch more geometry. We can just keep going. It's important to note that when making characters, you really want a lot of loops that have all of these squares. In 3D modeling, these are called quads, and as much as possible, we want to maintain quads. When we're working with characters that can deform, there's this thing that happens sometimes when you don't have a full quad, where let's say you have a triangle. You know, I'm gonna size this down here till there's nothing left, but I can merge them, and suddenly we legitimately only have one vertex right here. Now that's a problem. We never want it to look like this. See, this triangle, when it moves, it won't move the same as everything else. So I'm gonna do another little Blender trick here. So like, you can see there's a little bit of a difference. And that difference can be more or less noticeable. Sometimes it really doesn't matter at all, and sometimes it matters a lot. But it's always the best practice to make sure that everything has proper loops. So imagine we're making an arm. Let's make an appendage off this guy. We can press the E key to do an extrusion. Now we can use our loop cut by Command R, and then we've got a couple of sections here. And we've got biceps. We could alt-click them, and then we can scale here. Turn off this thing. We can move it around. See, we can like start to get a bicep, and like, oh, we need an elbow. So then we're good to go with that, and then, ooh, give me a little quadricep. Now, the problem is, this looks like a photocopier married a grill. Like, this looks terrible, right? However, everything we just talked about is what we'll use to make really organic looking shapes. One other shortcut that I want to make sure that you know before we go in is the shrink fatten effect. When you select a loop here, shrink fatten can be really helpful because it will like literally shrink or fatten the loop without changing the other transformation ratios. So you'll have shrink fatten to pull out this character. We're starting to make like a weird hand grenade character. It's also worth talking about selecting. There are going to be times where we need to make some weird selections of some of these things. So a really cool old Blender shortcut is pressing the C key. That'll bring up this little circle here. You can scroll on this circle, and then when you're pressing down with it, it's basically a brush. You can middle click to not select things, and basically anything that gets in its way, it's going to select, unless the selector can't see it. So you might be wondering, why can't I select this vertex right here? It seems like I should be able to, but I can't. Why is that? Well, that's because from that view, Blender considers this behind the model. So if I'm here and I'm trying to select where it is, it's not happening. It's being occluded. It's behind the model. So that can be tricky with selection sometimes. So you see, I just made this loop cut. Now let's say I want to select everything else. I want all of my edges. So something that's really nice and fast is we can combine these things. So we can alt-click to get our loop cut, and then we can press Command I to be able to invert our selection. You can already see how this is going to save us a ton of time. We can also box select. I currently have my mouse configured to box select by default, but you can also press the B key and click to do a box select. You may have noticed thus far I've been switching in between selecting edges and selecting faces and selecting points. Now, these are all shortcuts as well that we can use quickly. If you're using a full-size keypad, you can press the 1, 2, and 3 keys to be able to select the different styles. Throughout this video on modeling, you're going to see me doing all of this stuff all the time. You're going to see me switching between edges because sometimes I want edges and sometimes I want faces, so I'll have faces. If I press the X key, I can delete things, and you can see I can delete things based on what kind of system I want to use. I can delete vertices, I can delete edges, I can delete faces. There'll be times where I just want to delete a face and I want it to go away, and there'll be times where I want to delete vertices, and then I'll end up removing a lot of things. There'll be times where I want to dissolve vertices, and then you'll see that the face remains even if the edges go away. There'll be a lot of times where we're going to want to dissolve an edge loop. So we'll create one with our loop cut, right click it to stick in the center, and then we'll hit dissolve edges, and then we'll have everything the way we just had it. So if you have a numpad, and if you don't, you can set this up in your preferences for Blender. We can press different buttons. So pressing button 1 is always going to put us in the exact center. So currently we're looking at our model from head on. Pressing 3 will give us a side view. 7 will give us a top down. And then 9 will give us, I believe this is the bottom. You can press Command to get the inverse of whatever it is. So if 1 is the front, Command plus 1 is going to give us the back. Command plus 3 is going to give us the other side. Command plus 7 is going to give us the bottom. One other little trick I'll point out when you're using Blender, sometimes you're going to find yourself like zoomed way too in or zoomed out too far, and you're going to want to be able to switch to something. So that's where pressing Shift B comes in. Shift B will let you zoom in, but also set like a relative point of reference. So if I'm way out and I can Shift B, I can just get all the way where I need to be, and then I can still zoom in and zoom out. There will be points in time where you feel like you can't zoom. Shift B is always the answer. Now let's talk about modifiers. So I mainly use 2 modifiers when I start making stylized characters in Blender. We're going to press Shift A to create a new cube, and I'll zoom in here on it using my scroll wheel. I'm going to go to my modifiers tab here, and then I'm going to hit mirror. So mirror is great. And mirror is already working. However, you'll notice that nothing really changed. So when I press tab again, I have the ability to edit everything. So I'm gonna press G to move stuff, and you'll see that mirror was working the whole time. It's just that the mirror is working off of the y-axis, basically mirroring what's going on the x of either side of the y-axis here in the middle, based on this origin point. Everything that exists in x is going to negative x as well. So we could change that, and it'll start going to y. You can see I clicked both, though, instead of just clicking one, and everything has been mirrored. So we typically don't want that. That's typically a little overkill, but x-axis is very helpful. Whenever we make characters, we don't want to have any faces inside the character. You never want faces that no one will ever see. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the faces here, and then I'm going to press A to select everything, and I'm going to recombine things. Now, we still have a problem here. This isn't quite meshing. So I'm going to turn on clipping. Clipping is what makes everything work. So when we clip things and we push them all together, then suddenly we've got magic. This is one item now, and when we move it around, we've got just one thing. When we extrude, the mirror pulls the extrusion with us. When we start to make an arm or a t-shirt here, it's done for us on the other side. Now, this can be tricky sometimes, because let's say we wanted to make a neck for a t-shirt, and we pressed Inset. Well, we've insetted on both sides too. So we haven't made a neck, we've made two necks. Got two necks for some weird double neck person. Here, I'm gonna see, look, we got a two-necked guy. The last modifier that I'm gonna use is the Subdivision surface modifier. Now, you just notice that changed everything, but when we press tab to go back into edit mode, we can see that we still have a square here. Now, watch what happens when we start changing this model, when we start using it like we would ordinarily. When we start extruding, we could make a loop cut here. What if we made another loop cut? You can see that things are starting to look different. Now, basically what Subdivision Surface does is it does math based on how many faces we have here and subdivides them by cutting everything in halves. Basically, for whatever level we have here, and we're always going to be going off this levels viewport number, we are going to create basically exponential amount of faces, and they are going to be smoothed. Think of this as a machine that makes jelly beans that we're going to convince to make a character. I always use both of these modifiers whenever I'm making stylized characters. I go in, I make a mirror, then I click on my loop cut tool, and I make a loop right in the middle. I press the 3 button to get a face, and then I delete the other side from the vertices. Now, you can see here that I messed it up, right? I'm on the wrong axis. I'm going to start over a little bit. So I'm going to press Command R to make a loop cut, and I'll make a loop cut in the middle. Then I'm going to press 3, get the faces, and then I'll delete them. But you can see the mirror modifier is already making up for that. Now, let's see, do we have a face in the middle? We got some kind of problem here. This doesn't look right. So let me go back. What we want to do is delete everything based on their faces, or based on their vertices. You should see all of the vertices and faces and lines, whatever you're using, appear on one side and not on the other. Now that we have the mirror, let's add the subdivision surface. Now suddenly we have this ball that we can use on both sides. This is pretty good. Now we're going to switch in and out of changing our shading. If you right click, you can shade smooth, or you can shade flat. Now shade flat can be really helpful for kind of making out visually what's going on, and shade smooth is ultimately where we're going to leave things in the end so that we don't have any of these vertices, that we can have like the illusion of not seeing the vertices. So let's do shade flat for now. All of this may seem really overwhelming, but if you stick with me here, I think we're going to come to a really great conclusion with all of this, and you'll start to feel really comfortable. This is where things get awesome, because with using these modifiers and all of these keyboard shortcuts, we can start to put together stuff that we would never have been able to otherwise, and we can do it really quickly. So I'm going to Command A to grab everything, S, Y, pull it together, so now we've got like sort of a normal torso. I'm going to make a loop cut with Command R. I'm going to push that up. I'm going to press 3 to get the face. Then I'm going to press E to extrude. I'm going to pull that out to arm's length. I'm going to make another loop cut. I'm going to pull it in so that that doesn't look so weird. Then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make a little elbow. Then you start to see where this is going. And make another extrusion for the hands with E. This whole thing's looking a little weird. So I'm going to press Command plus to increase my selection. Then I'm going to move that back. Love it. Love it. And then we go underneath here. We can extrude on one side and pull it out here. Now sometimes you want to make that pull happen before you turn on clipping. You can turn off clipping at any time, but when clipping's on, you're not going to be able to separate stuff. Now let's keep going here, right? So like I've already got something. So like now we've got like sort of thighs and knees and stuff. We get a little booty. That's the weirdest booty. I'm not gonna do that. I'll just pull out here, start to give our person some shape. We'll do like 2 extrudes here to make some feet. And then you know, we can do another extrude here. We'll actually shift that back down, and then I'm gonna scale it in, pressing S, and then pull it together using G, make a weird little teeny tiny neck here, and pull it out. You can kind of see where this is going, and Tiny Face Man is born. One other cool keyboard shortcut with Subdivision that you can do is when you're selecting edges, you can press Shift E, and that will make things a little bit more decisive in terms of like how far should the smooth range go. So this is just an example of how easy it is to start making a 3D model. Like if you think about popular video games like Fall Guys or like Among Us or something like that, it's like ridiculously easy using these systems. As always, feel free to reach out if you want to talk to us on Discord, if you want to communicate. I love interacting with people about this content and about this work. If you've got a sweet idea that we could help bring to life, then let me know. Don't be a stranger. Thanks for hanging out.